Hello there, and welcome to episode 2 of my Lancastrians and Yorkists vlog. Remember that last time we talked about some of the longer term causes of Richard II's usurpation, or the usurpation of Richard II rather. Whereas this time we're going to look at some of the short term causes and perhaps one or two of the consequences of that. Also, you'll remember that we said that some of the themes of this period are about war, the 100 Years' War dominating the first part of the Lancastrians and Yorkists course, as a sort of background rumble, always there, ticking over, and having its impact seen not least through the problems of taxation on the monarchy. Also the issue of having an heir and stabilising your throne through that heir, and a rising issue of the balance of power in the country between the king and the nobility. Remember that Richard II had trouble back in the 1380s with Parliament over taxation and his advisors, and that had led to the first kind of bout of confrontation between nobles and Richard II. Henry Bolingbroke had been part of that, and sometime later in the late 1390s, Richard II had acted to take revenge on some of the other instigators of it. Well, in 1399, when the Duke of John of Gaunt died, Duke of Lancaster, and his heir Henry Bolingbroke was in exile, Richard II intervened to say that that Henry Bolingbroke could not inherit the lands of his father. That was against protocol, and basically caused Henry Bolingbroke to throw all his toys out the pram and decide to rebel against Richard II and to seize the throne from him, put him in his place. So he gets the help and support of the Duke of Orleans, the French king's brother, and the French king is persuaded to allow Henry to make preparations for an invasion force to go back to England and to confront Richard and take the throne from him. During this time, Richard II seems kind of unbothered about it. Maybe he's confident that because he's married to the daughter of the King of France, that he is secure. And off he pops to Ireland, leaving England in the charge of the Duke of York. So that doesn't work at all, because in July 1399, Henry Bolingbroke landed on the Humber in the northeast of England with a strong force and gathered lots of support around him, including the Duke of York, who had been left in charge of the country. It takes a while for Richard to come back. We're not really sure why he's so slow at it, but he comes back and he meets with Henry Bolingbroke on the 16th of August when Richard is taken prisoner and initially taken off to London and then other places as well. The support of the nobility for Henry Bolingbroke at this time is particularly damning of Richard II, and probably indicates that they were worried about his behaviour. And indeed, this is one of the ways that Henry Bolingbroke justifies seizing the throne. He says first of all, he says that Richard II gave up the throne, and then later on he has a committee put together who looks into Richard II's throne and concludes, not that surprisingly, that it was immoral, unjust, and erratic. But there is something in that the nobility were very kind of angry with Richard by the time that Henry Bolingbroke steps in. Probably this idea of, which had been seen in the way that Bolingbroke had been treated, that Richard had pardoned people and then gone back on his word, that he was cruising around the country with all these 700 archers. He was being seen as running the country in a tyrannical way, and that's bad enough, but people didn't know if they would be next in line. Now, that's kind of justification for why you get rid of Richard, but why should Henry Bolingbroke step in? Because actually, Henry Bolingbroke was not the true heir. The technical heir to the throne was Edmund Mortimer. So you'll remember that I said that Edward III had 5 sons. Son number 1, Edward the Black Prince, he died, and Richard, his son, became king. Richard has no children, so the heirdom pops back up to Edward III's second son, Lionel. He had died, and his son Roger Mortimer had also died. So the heirship, I don't know what the name is, what of those, had passed to Edmund Mortimer. But the problem there was that Edmund was only 8. So he wasn't in a great position to raise an army or anything like that. And Henry Bolingbroke takes over because he's an adult and he's got an army and he's got support of the nobility. Very wisely, he takes Edmund, the 8-year-old, and his brother Roger, and puts them in the castle at Windsor under royal control or royal wardship, just in case anyone wanted to make a thing of it. So, just to recap, the causes of the uprising, I would say here, are Richard II's tyranny, and that can be seen in the 2 or 3 years before 1399, but it can also be seen stretching all the way back to the Peasants' Revolt in the 1380s. Coupled with this, the lack of confidence or support that the nobility were willing to offer Richard, they very much kind of flock to Henry Bolingbroke as soon as he turns up with his army. Bolingbroke himself and the way he'd been treated, but the way he responds to that, seizes the initiative. He is a cause of the uprising. And then also, perhaps, you might say, French interference, that it would have been difficult for Bolingbroke to have launched his invasion, some would say impossible, if the French king had intervened against it. But the French king seemed quite happy to cause trouble for his English neighbour. So there are kind of 4 immediate causes of the problems, or of the usurpation. It's better to say that. What happens next? Well, initially, things go fairly smoothly for Henry Bolingbroke, who now is called Henry IV. He's crowned on the 13th of October with full ceremony. And his son Henry, who later becomes Henry V, is made Prince of Wales, and is installed as the official heir to the throne. So we've jumped tracks here from the official heir of the Mortimers to now Henry Bolingbroke and his son. Henry revoked some unpopular decisions that Richard had made in 1397-98. He restored those 1396. He kind of undoes some of the unpopular stuff, brings back things that had been more popular. And he also told Parliament that he could live off his own earnings, unless tax was needed for war, which is kind of an extraordinary expenditure. This was really popular and very good initially, and Henry was kind of saying that don't worry about things, I'm wealthy enough to be king and I can do it under my own steam. However, that does cause him problems later on, but initially it's quite a populist move. He also survives an uprising against him, a kind of slightly tame uprising called the Epiphany Uprising, because it was going to take place at Epiphany just after Christmas. He survives it because he's warned about it, and also because it's not a very popular or well supported uprising. But it's led by John Holland, who is the half brother of Richard II, and John's son Thomas Holland, who was obviously the nephew of Richard II. And both of them had been important nobility under Richard II. They'd been the Dukes of Exeter and Surrey, and they'd both been demoted by Henry IV. So they kind of had personal skin in the game, and they were rebelling in order to put Richard II back on the throne. They were supported by the Dukes of Salisbury and Gloucester, but not many other people. And it was, like I say, Henry was warned about it, sidestepped it, all over. The most important consequence of that initially is that it probably led to the death of Richard II, who was imprisoned in Pontefract Castle at that time. He died in February 1400. We're not completely sure how he died, what the immediate cause was. Probably the smart thinking amongst historians is that he's murdered in order to stop him being someone that rebels can kind of go towards. It's possible, and it was claimed at the time, that he took his own life by starving himself to death, but perhaps more likely that he was helped on his way. His body is displayed to prove that he had died and ending kind of hopes of any restoration. One of the questions that you could be asked, though, about Henry's usurpation of the throne from Richard is what the consequences are. And I would say that the biggest consequence of all is by far is that it potentially legitimises rebellion later on. it allows people to think that they can sit in judgment upon the monarch. And you're sort of gradually getting a bit of a shift here from the absolutist God inspired kingships of medieval eras to what we think of now as kind of a more modern form of kingship. And that the tipping point here is that people feel able to critique what the monarch is up to, and they still need some justification for doing that. But the fact that Henry can come back and take the throne, even though he's not the heir, is a sign that people are willing, under extreme situations, to step out from the way things had worked before, the kind of the accepted way of doing things. And that is seen in the following years, partly through rebellions, the Hotspur's rebellion, the Glyndŵr rebellion, and some problems that Henry has with Scotland and Wales and support, that people are kind of able to say to him, you're not actually the real king. So that's by far the biggest consequence. And we'll look at that next time. Thanks for watching. See you next time.